Hey, John.
Hello, Tyler.
Happy podcast day.
Happy podcast day to you.
We made it again. Can you believe it?
Yeah, another week, another round of fun and interesting church history.
I know. Every time I think we're going to move on to the next, what I'm calling volume, which I promised our listeners, our devout listeners, I promised them we're going to start the next volume as soon as we get, and we're going to talk about the establishment of an actual church. And every time I'm ready to do it, I sit down, I read the outline, and you amaze me with more and more awesome info, awesome accounts of things that happened prior to the organization of the church. So I'm excited for this one today. It's going to be great.
Yes, I've pulled what the sports people call an audible. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, Tyler, but the sports people, it's a term they use when they change their minds about something. It's a fun word, and I'm excited to use it, and I'm excited to do it today.
Is that why you started this with Omaha?
Yes. That is also a sports term that the sports people use when they are signaling for people to do something that has been previously planned upon.
You don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
Yeah, that's Peyton Manning calling out his play.
It's a quick
Yeah,
snap.
he's a sports person. It's the quick snap.
Omaha means hike it to me as soon as possible because the clock's going to run down.
Why does he say it 3 times then? Wouldn't it be faster just to say it once?
Well, he'll say it until they hike him the ball, probably. I don't know. We'll ask him next time we have him on the podcast. We'll ask him why he says it more than once.
I'm just saying, if I was a sports person, I'd only say it once. But
and that's why
what
you're
do
not
I
a sports
know?
person. That is exactly why you're not a sports person.
That's right. I'm a podcast person. So, do you want to know what? Yeah, we should.
Yes, I do.
Is there podcast lingo? We should. Yeah, we'll talk about it later. And then,
if you want to do Mormon history podcast, you have to wear some sort of superhero shirt. I've learned that in my short stint in this podcast world. All the great ones have superhero shirts.
I've noticed that too. I'm wearing a gray polo, so also worn by. Pretty sure a superhero wore a gray polo once. Anyway, on to today's episode. So we've been talking.
I'm sorry, I just can't believe that we pay all this money for this cool recording stuff, and now nowhere in here do they have cricket sounds.
Yeah.
What a waste. All right, go ahead. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so today we're talking about the 3 witnesses, which we've touched on before, but we haven't really done a deep dive. And this, of course, is one of the most important events in church history, is these 3 and 8 witnesses that testified of the Book of Mormon. I'm sure you're familiar with the 3 witnesses.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm just wondering why you say they are, what did you say, the most important? Is that the term? Most interesting?
Right.
I can't remember what term you just said.
It's one of the most important.
Important, okay. I'm sure we'll delve into why, because I've never considered, maybe it's just me, I've never considered it the most important, but.
Did I say most important?
One of the most important.
Yeah, I would say it's one of the most important.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we are touching on it then.
Can we agree that it's one of the most important?
Well, here we go. My whole spiel on this is that I don't really I don't care what people think. I care what actually happened. So witnesses are great, and it's
Oh,
cool that they saw it. But is this firsthand accounts? Yeah, it is. So yes, it is very important. I'm with you. I agree. This is one of the most important aspects of Mormon history.
Mr. Hoity-toity over here doesn't care what people say happened, only what really happened.
No, I don't. I don't care what people today think might have happened. Like, oh, he probably said that because I think that he was thinking this. That's what I don't care so much about.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm with you on the same page. Sorry, it's a slow start. You scheduled this during a very important hockey game, and I'm just trying not to walk away and watch a hockey game.
Well, I'm sorry. Okay, let's jump in. So the three witnesses are Peter Whitmer, Martin Harris, and Oliver Cowdery. Now, these three characters are important to church history. They were important to Joseph Smith. We've talked about Martin Harris a bunch. Obviously, kind of financed Joseph's. Well, he financed the Book of Mormon, essentially, the translation and the printing of it. He mortgaged his farm, pretty much uh, ruined his marriage to bring the Book of Mormon um, to the masses. Oliver Cowdery was also important because he translated the majority of it. And by translating, I mean he wrote down what Joseph Smith was saying while he translated it. And then David Whitmer was Oliver Cowdery's friend. He became Joseph Smith's friend. And he put his family put Joseph and Emma and Oliver up while they finished the translation. So three very important people to Joseph. So we'll
Would,
start. Oh,
would
go
you
ahead.
say that these three are the most involved? I mean, you mentioned Mr. Knight previously, but would you say these
Hmm.
are the three that have given the most to the cause up to this point? I mean, I'm thinking
I think,
Hiram, Joseph Smith Sr., Emma, obviously. Um, but
yeah,
would you say these three are the contributed the most?
yeah, that's a tough question. I would say definitely, with the exception of Emma. Emma probably gave the most, other than she and Joseph probably gave a lot together. But yeah, the Knights were involved, but kind of after Joseph got the plates, they kind of disappear for a little while. Um, but yeah, definitely Martin Harris. He's got to be up there, and Oliver Cowdery too. David Whitmer. I mean, the whole Whitmer family definitely gave a lot, and he's the one that was responsible for getting Joseph and Emma and Oliver there to Harmony, not Harmony, sorry, to the Whitmer house where they were, where they finished the translation. So I don't know. Yeah, I would think definitely Oliver and Martin and David as a representative of the Whitmer family. I think you could. I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
So we'll start our tale today in March of 1829. And this is when Doctrine and Covenants, Section 5, is written and received. And this is where we get the sense that there's going to be three witnesses. They've been mentioned before, there would be multiple witnesses, but here we finally get this announcement that there would be three people who would add their testimonies to Joseph's. And the one verse says, Behold, if they will not believe my words, they being the world, they would not believe you, my servant Joseph, if it were possible that you should show them all these things which I have committed unto you. So, even if you were to show them everything, um, most people won't believe you. And then it goes on to say, the testimony of three of my servants, whom I shall call and ordain, unto whom I will show these things, and they shall go forth with my words that are given through you. And they shall know of a surety that these things are true from heaven, and I will give them power that they may behold and view these things. So March 1829. So the context around that revelation is that Martin Harris was once again kind of on the fence about things. He still hadn't seen the plates. Apparently, he had seen them under a handkerchief. He had held them while they were in the box. He'd lifted them up while they were covered, but he hadn't seen the actual plates, and he was getting kind of antsy about it. And so Joseph gets this revelation. Then in June, so was that three months later, he gets another one in Doctrine and Covenants 17. It says, it tells them that after they faith, they will see not only the plates, but also the Urim and Thummim, the sword of Laban, and the Liahona. Now, the sword of Laban and the Liahona are relics from the Book of Mormon. They're objects that played an important part in that narrative. The sword of Laban is, how Nephi killed Laban, who held the brass plates that the Nephites used to teach the word of God in the narrative. And the Liahona was an object that guided them to the promised land, which Mormon tradition says is the Western Hemisphere.
And I know, obviously, Joseph took the gold plates and the Urim and Thummim out of the Hill Cumorah. Did he also take the sword and the Liahona with him as well? Or did he leave those up there?
Yeah, so my understanding is he left those. He only took the plates and the Urim and Thummim. So then the actual vision occurs around that same time, June 1829. Let's see. So Joseph and Oliver decide that they're going to go do this. They're going into the woods near the Whitmer house, and they're going to try to have an experience in which 3 people besides Joseph will be able to see the plates. So what they do is they leave the house. They go and find David, who's out working. They tell him the plan. They go and get Martin, and the 4 of them go out into the woods. It says, we went to the woods, to which we retired, and having knelt down, we began to pray in much faith. Joseph prayed first. He gave a vocal prayer to God and was followed by each of the rest in succession. Nothing happened, though. And then they did it again with the same result. He says this with the same result as before.
By nothing happened. Sorry, I was following this until you said nothing happened. So Joseph is in possession of the plates at this time, or is this after he already gave them back?
So he doesn't have them on himself at that moment.
Okay, so instead of showing them the plates, he leaves the plates back in, presumably, where in the house, and then he took the 3 of them out to the trees or the field, and they all prayed, and
Right.
presumably to can I say presumably after what I said about wanting to know facts? They went out to the field, they all prayed, and Joseph did not show them the plates. Is that what you mean by nothing happened?
Right. Yeah. It's not like he pulled them out of his pocket and said, "Here they are." No.
Okay.
So yeah, the intent.
I know where you're going with this, but I kind of wanted to pretend like I didn't know where you're going with this.
Sure.
And because if you say, "Hey, I'm going to show you the plates now," and you go to the field and everyone prays, I think that they would expect him to say, "Here's the plates."
But, yeah. But how are you going to show them to us? You don't have. You're not carrying.
You said they're back there. Let's go inside the room and look at them. So, all right, go ahead.
Right. So I should clarify. So they knew that an angel would show them the plates, and that's
okay.
That's what the Revelations had declared, that an angel would show them. Presumably, the angel was Moroni.
So they were expecting an angel to come show them the plates.
Correct. Gotcha. Yeah. So they're out in the woods. They're praying. Nothing happens after 2 rounds of prayers. And then Martin Harris decides that it's his fault that nothing's happening for whatever reason. Presumably, he felt guilty still about losing the 116 pages, or maybe because he constantly was asking for more and more evidence of the plates. For whatever reason it was, he decides to get up and and go off on his own. And then the Joseph says, "We knelt down again and had not been many minutes engaged in prayer when presently we beheld a light above us in the air of exceeding brightness. And behold, an angel stood before us. In his hands he held the plates which we had been praying for these to have a view of. He turned the leaves one by one so that we could see them and discern the engravings thereon. He addressed himself to David Whitmer and said, 'David, blessed is the Lord, and he that keeps his commandments.' When immediately afterwards we heard a voice from out of the bright light above us, saying, 'These plates have been revealed by the power of God.'" See the plates. The angel flips through the pages, and they have this experience. We'll talk about other accounts of this vision a little bit further on. But then what happens is Joseph gets up, he leaves Martin David and Oliver, and goes to find Martin. And
You
he
said we'll talk
finds him.
about. Sorry, you said we'll talk about other accounts, and just remind me, this is out of Joseph Smith history. This account.
Correct. Yeah.
So it would have been written by Joseph Smith.
Yeah. So it would have been written
scribe?
by Joseph Smith and his scribes, and Sidney Rigdon, I think, was helping too at the time.
Okay.
But this was in 1838 is when this was written. So
which is
about 9 years after. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he's talking about this experience. Now, I should back up, I guess, because we, on this podcast, our formula is to talk about sources. The chronology is a source chronology, right? As the sources come out. The reason we're doing this now is because the testimony of the three witnesses that's now in the preface of the Book of Mormon was written in 1829. So even though this part happens later, the actual testimony was written before the church was organized. So he goes and finds Martin. He joins Martin in prayer, and almost immediately the same vision happens for Joseph and Martin. Now, the interesting thing here is that this is Joseph talking. He says, "The same vision was opened to our view, at least it was again to me. And I once more beheld and seen and heard the same thing. Whilst at the same moment, Martin Harris cried out, apparently in an ecstasy of joy, 'Tis enough, mine eyes have beheld, mine eyes have beheld.'" So it's kind of, I think the language here is kind of interesting because he says, I once more beheld and seen and heard the same things. And at least it was again to me. So as he's remembering the event, he's remembering it for himself. He's not really speaking for Martin. So kind of some interesting language there.
And are you going to, sounds like you're setting us up for something. Is this setting us up for something coming up?
Sort of, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're saying that it's interesting that he's speaking for himself as to what he saw, and you say he's not speaking for Martin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the testimony of the three witnesses comes out. Oliver, David, and Martin. They get together. They write down about they write their experience down. Some of the highlights from that are: "Be it known to all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people." So they're writing to everyone, essentially. "God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, have seen the plates. We have seen the plates through their grace, which contain this record." Goes on to kind of give a little bit of a synopsis of the book, like the different records that are within the Book of Mormon narrative. "And we also know that they have been translated by the gift and power of God, for his voice hath declared it unto us." So it wasn't enough for them to say that we saw the plates. They also had to say that they knew that it was translated by the gift and power of God. If you remember in the account that Joseph wrote, he says that they all heard a voice that said that these plates have been translated by the power of God.
translated correctly.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. Let's see. And then it says, and we declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven, and he brought and laid before our eyes that we beheld and saw the plates and the engravings thereon. And we know that it is by the grace of God the Father and Jesus Christ that we beheld the record, and that these things are true. And then it says, and we know that if we are faithful, will be found spotless. I'm summarizing here. Lord commanded us that we should bear record of it. And yeah, so those are kind of the highlights of that, of the testimony of these three people. Now,
So, so you pulled this from the Joseph Smith papers. Is this account easily accessible, or do you have to dig through the Joseph Smith papers to find them? And you may call that easily accessible. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's relative.
For the non.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, if you go to josephsmithpapers.org and in the search bar type in testimony of the three witnesses, you'll probably find it pretty easily.
Okay, there you go. If you have trouble finding it, email John.
Yes.
At withthestonerolling@gmail.com.
And I check that email all the time, and I'm constantly disappointed at how empty it is.
We get some spam now. We're getting on the spam radar.
Oh, really? Honestly,
would you like a new?
I haven't checked it in months.
I check it periodically.
Oh, okay.
Every once in a while, someone stumbles across our contact us part of our website, and so I can see that. And so if someone gets to that part of our website, I generally check in just to make sure they weren't sending hate mail or something.
Yeah. Well, I'll get on one of these days.
You don't need. I'll let you know. Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
I've got your back.
Third. Thanks. Appreciate that. Okay, so then a few days after, there's the 8 witnesses, and this experience is a little bit less. It's less. I don't know. Tremendous, I guess. It's not as grand and big. But what happens with the 8 witnesses is Joseph takes 8 people again out into the woods and shows them the plates himself. And these are most of the Whitmer family, a lot of them, and their brother-in-law, Hiram Page, and then his father, Joseph Smith Sr., his brother Hiram, and his younger brother, Samuel. And they also talk about how Joseph showed them the plates, and they, leafed through the pages, that sort of thing. So they didn't have an angel show them, or any of the other things that Martin and Oliver and David would talk about later.
But they saw them. Did they touch them? You said.
Yes.
They were able to turn the pages and look at the engravings and everything. Okay.
Yeah. And then another witness, we've talked about her a little bit. This is Mary Whitmer. This was David Whitmer's mother. She also reportedly saw the plates. A few episodes ago, we talked about this, how Joseph and Emma and Oliver had just moved in, and she was supposedly feeling quite overwhelmed. And I say supposedly because she didn't say this herself, right? This is David Whitmer saying that she must have felt overwhelmed and stressed out at having so many people to take care of. And she's out working, and a man approaches her, and he says, "You have been very faithful and diligent in your labors, but you are tired because of the increase in your toil. It is proper, therefore, that you should receive a witness, that your faith may be strengthened." And then he shows her the plates.
When I first heard this story, I found it
Mhm.
interesting that was the angel Moroni. What did someone? I that's what my memory tells me. But do you
Yeah,
recall?
that's the tradition, is that it was Moroni who showed her.
Traditionally, is Moroni.
Mhm.
It was interesting that an angel Moroni would approach her very differently than he would approach Joseph Smith or anybody else, with the white robe, the levitating in the air, the um, as I imagine, and this might just be based on art after the fact, but radiating light coming from the angel. Joseph
Mhm.
may have said that. I don't recall. It's interesting that when the angel chooses to appear um, to Mary Whitmer, he would kind of just walk up and look like an ordinary person. So it sounds, at least, based on the account.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. There's another example of that, actually. When David Whitmer first meets Joseph Smith, um, he actually went and picked them up, Joseph and Oliver, and brought them back to his farm. And as they were traveling back, uh, according to David, I don't have the story in front of me, but from what I remember, he goes and he picks up Joseph and Oliver, and at first he's kind of surprised to see them coming toward him, coming to meet him. And on the journey back, Oliver tells him that Joseph told him that as they were waiting for David, that he told him what David was experiencing in that moment, and that if they left at a certain time and traveled in a certain direction, they would run into him. And again, this is according to David Whitmer. And so that's what happened. And he's kind of astounded at that. And
That they would
then,
run
and then as
into
they're
Angel Moroni.
no, that Joseph would prophesy what was happening at that time. And then as they're traveling, the three of them back to David's farm, the Whitmer farm, they come across an old man who is walking in the opposite direction. He says, they say hi to him. They ask him if he would like a lift or something. And he says, "No, I'm on my way to Camorra." And he keeps on walking. And, just a regular looking older fellow. And, um, and Joseph tells David that that was indeed Moroni. So supposedly there's two examples of Moroni appearing just as a regular guy, um, as instead of the glorious depiction that we usually see in LDS traditions.
And all he said is, "I'm on my way to Kimura."
Yeah, maybe something
Okay.
else like "How you doing? Good
Have
to see you."
have a
I
good
don't know.
day.
Yeah.
But he didn't say, "I'm a messenger sent from God to."
No. Yeah. So you're right. He did not identify himself as Moroni. So,
Interesting. I've never heard that
yeah.
before.
Yeah. So, any questions so far? We You hanging in there?
No, no, this is great. I, I I lost you a little bit on the story of this last story, but I got the gist of it, that they saw the angel Moroni walking. I lost you, but I'll rewind and listen to it, and it'll make more sense the second time around.
Yeah. Maybe I'll dig up the link and put it on our Instagram page. People can look at it there. All right. So, as I alluded to earlier, the Joseph Smith recollection from 1838 is not the only time. It's not the only recollection there is. Obviously, the three witnesses were asked about this constantly for the rest of their lives. We have lots of examples of David Whitmer and Martin Harris, especially, talking about it. Oliver Cowdery, the record is a little bit more sparse, mostly because he died very young, whereas Whitmer and Harris lived to be pretty old. But the most famous account of Oliver Cowdery sort of relating what happened is in 1848. So Oliver had been excommunicated, and then he had been rejoined the church in 1848. and he was still living in Missouri at the time, but the church was having, or at least a part of the church was having a conference in Iowa, in Council Bluffs, and Oliver had just been rebaptized,
So
and he goes.
I'm just
Go ahead.
thinking through those dates in my head. So he was excommunicated in 1837,
Mm-hmm.
and then you said he rejoined the church in 1842. Is that what you said?
No, he
18,
said 1848.
1848. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's several years after Joseph Smith had died, correct?
correct.
Like
Mm-hmm.
5, 6, 7 years after.
4 years.
4 years. Okay, 4 years after.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just trying to organize all this in my head because that's why I love this podcast. Is doing it chronologically really helps me understand what's going on that time period as we talk about these events. So
Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of time jumping, so it's good to keep us on track. Yeah, so he goes to this conference, and everyone's kind of, a buzz that he's there. It's like, oh, it's Oliver Cowdery, the second elder of the church, the translator, or at least the writer, the guy who wrote down the translation. He's a big name, is what I'm trying to say. So he gets up and he kind of gives a testimony where he says, I wrote with my own pen the entire Book of Mormon, save a few pages, as it fell from the lips of the prophet as he translated it by the gift and power of God, by the means of the Urim and Thummim, or as it is called by that book, holy interpreters. I beheld with my eyes and handled with my hands the gold plates from which it was translated. I also beheld the interpreters. So that's probably the most famous one, and he would actually die, I think, not long after. I know he died 16 months after he was rebaptized. So,
okay, I'm trying to
so he never
remember.
made it west.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't mind humoring me for a second, I'm trying to remember um, some things that I think I've read. Oliver Cowdery, was he co-president of the church for a time?
Yeah, I think he was.
So he's co-president.
Mm-hmm.
He was excommunicated. Do we know
Mm-hmm.
why he was excommunicated?
Yes, we do, and we'll have an episode on this. But there's a couple of reasons.
Okay,
It
well,
wasn't just
okay then. Suffice said that he was excommunicated then,
okay.
and
Yeah.
then after Joseph Smith dies, he comes back, and if I recall, he was kind of pitching to be the next president. Is that true? Or am I
Not that I know
no?
of.
Okay,
Because
I might be confusing it then.
yeah, he was. I think. Well, the church had already moved west, right? And so Council
Okay,
Bluffs was kind of a launching point or a stopping point on the trail west. Um, and he was still in Missouri, so he wasn't. I he may have been planning on getting out there. He probably was, but yeah, not to my knowledge was he trying to kind of you know take over or gain some sort of leadership.
okay. So the context of this would just be he's back in the church and he's just telling his experience, just to
Correct. Yep.
like a like one would expect in a testimony meeting per
Yeah,
se.
yeah. I think sort of the purpose of this meeting and his testimony was to number one to declare he was back. Number two, as kind of a public repentance, I guess, to let everyone know that he'd been humbled, I guess, because the way he left the church, it was pretty ugly, and he may have burnt some bridges on his way out. In fact, he did burn some bridges on his way out. So this was him kind of coming back and offering sort of a public apology. And then
Okay.
the third aspect I would say is that all three of these witnesses consider themselves to have a very serious responsibility to testify of their experience with the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
which is very interesting, right? That they would do this because all three of them did it throughout their lives. So anyway, so I think those are sort of the three reasons for why he did that.
I mean, it goes to show a level of consistency over someone's life. I think that merits something.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, I think, and it's hard to make sense of from a historian standpoint. I would say, other than uh, just to say that these were three men who were really, really dedicated and committed to a certain aspect of, or a certain experience that they had in their lives, and that they weren't willing to cast away for whatever reason.
So, from a historian standpoint, though, wouldn't that be evidence that it's something that was more likely to be a real occurrence, a real event? If, or is that not so much from a historical perspective? From an academic, critical, I don't know if critical is the right word, but an academic historian's perspective.
Yeah, from a critical analysis, absolutely. I think I th- I think you could take that, and many have. You know, there's lots of historians who say absolutely they experienced something. Um, there's a lot of devout historians who take them at their word and say they did. We can take them at their word, you know, and say they saw an angel, they had a supernatural experience. Then there are others. You know, there's lots of different takes on this. There are others who say no, they were just they were won over by Joseph Smith through, you know, several different ways. Some have even suggested that they were hypnotized. Um, and then there's, I think, sort of the middle of the road, or at least I would think the responsible historical viewpoint would be that these three, and if you count the 8 witnesses, these 11 people, these 11 men, experienced something that was so powerful that they were not willing to deny it ever. Um, Even though it would have been very easy, especially after so many of them were kicked out of the church and ostracized, or uh, you know, were turned away by Joseph Smith, or lost faith in him. Um, I think the responsible historical approach would be they experienced something. What it was, we can't really say. Um, and then there's different avenues you can take within that, you know. But yeah, they experienced something, and they wanted to remain true to that experience.
Why can't a historian say they experienced something, and due to the consistency of of their story, we think they experienced what they told us they experienced, that they actually saw and handled the plates? Because it sounds like you're carefully trying to not say that. Am I? Are you trying to not say that? You're saying they experienced something
No,
powerful, and they're sticking to that, but you haven't said that a historian says, because they said over and over throughout their entire lives that they handled the plates, they held the plates, that makes it more, it's strong, compelling evidence that that's what they actually did.
yeah.
That they actually held the plates, they actually
No, I'm
handled them.
not. In fact, yeah, I did say that there are very good historians out there who do take them at their word. You say, look, the evidence is there. These 11 men swear by it. None of them ever denied it. And so it's safe to say that that happened.
Okay.
And this is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but I do think it's important. There is a way to historically approach it by saying, yeah, we can take them at face value. We can say these people did experience this, what they said they experienced, without believing that they experienced it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. that basically
It's
that they have full conviction that they experienced it,
mhm,
but maybe they didn't actually experience what they like. Either their memories are all faulty together, or like you say, some sort of hypnosis, or I don't know.
mhm.
I guess big picture that my big takeaway is that whatever even a historian or anyone else's prejudices coming into this story, they're probably leaving with the same prejudice and with
Yeah,
the or it sounds to me like if you think that that it's impossible for an angel to show them the plates,
mhm.
then this probably isn't going to change your mind. And if you're thinking that there's no way that they were lying, you're already convicted. um,
Convinced.
you're
Yeah.
already convinced. Then this is gonna anchor that bias much stronger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. There's a really good historian named Ann Taves who is not LDS, but has taken a serious approach to the gold plates by really diving in and trying to figure out what exactly happened. And to her credit, and well, I think to her credit, but also to her own admission, she says she doesn't know, but that we still need to take it seriously because they took it seriously, and not just these eight witnesses, everyone in the church. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in this episode. Everyone in the church took these 11 witnesses seriously, and a lot of them were their membership kind of hinged on it. And then when Martin Harris left the church, some people went with him, because, well, he's one of the witnesses. Why wouldn't he? He didn't lie about that. He can't be lying now, that sort of thing. Same with David Whitmer. Um, so the point I'm making is that you don't have to believe it, but you do need to take these, as a historian, you do need to take this sort of thing seriously because they took it
Okay.
seriously. And I've talked about that
Maybe.
before too. It's not so much what we think about it, what we think happened. It's more important to approach it by how what they believed happened. Back in that world 200 years ago.
I think I'm starting to see why you introduced this by saying how important it was. Because I'm putting this in context now, where at this time in church history, the number one reason, if you were to poll all the members of the church or go to a testimony meeting as if they had them back then, I don't know if they did or didn't, but that this is the reason people joined the church because Joseph Smith translated an ancient record and had by the power of God. Whereas today we might say, I'm a member of the church because Joseph Smith had the first vision. That's why he's a prophet, or
Hmm.
because we have living prophets, or because this, that, the other. I think at this time, most people, this Book of Mormon translation, from the view of most people, is what gave Joseph his authority. And so to have 11 different witnesses back that up makes that authority that much stronger. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's
Yeah,
why
you're
it's so important.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting. You go back and look at some of the early sermons that church leaders gave, the missionaries gave, and they don't really take that much from the Book of Mormon. Um, they're not quoting it that frequently. They're mostly taking their sermons from the New Testament. But the Book of Mormon, as you said, was a tool that they used as evidence that Joseph Smith was a prophet and that the Church of Jesus was back on the earth. That's the narrative you get over and over and over again from very prominent converts, is that they were looking for something that resembled the Church of Christ. And so when you have a missionary who comes up and says, it's back, the Church of Christ is back, we have proof, here it is, it's this book, it was brought about by a prophet, And if you read this, then you'll see what we're talking about. So yeah, it was the Book of Mormon. It was mostly a tool or evidence of Joseph, and the the language they would use is the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ.
Thanks. Can we go on a very quick tangent? Because I had this thought. I know we this week, and I know we discussed it back in Volume 1. But you mentioned that they believe that this is the Church of Jesus on the earth, restored on the earth again.
Mm-hmm.
Remind me what you said then. Did Jesus establish a church? I know you mentioned he was building a kingdom, but did he call prophets, teachers, evangelists? Did he create a whole organization with different roles when he was on the earth? Or was he establishing a kingdom and he chose his apostles, and that was the organization, was Jesus and his apostles? His disciples, I should say.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea of a church as we know it did not exist at the time of Jesus. It was a lifestyle, right? If you were Jewish, you were Jewish. That was your identity. It wasn't, oh, that's part of my identity, like religion is now. You know, if you go ask somebody nowadays, I would argue, if you go ask somebody, tell me about your identity, religion membership is just one of the many things that they would give you, right? Um, but back then, if you were to ask somebody, it would be like, well, I'm Jewish, or I'm a Levite. Um, that's my heritage. That's who I am. And you know, it was a bigger part of their identity, their cultural identity. It wasn't a church. It was a culture. It was a nationality. All those things. So when Jesus was trying to build another one of those, a new kingdom that was, you know, more encompassing, I guess, than anything that anyone there was really accustomed to.
So would that kingdom have prophets and teachers and other people, I don't know if set apart's the right word, or called or chosen to do certain roles within his
Mm-hmm.
kingdom?
Yeah,
Is there
yeah,
any evidence?
absolutely.
Okay. Because
Yeah. So, for
all I
example,
recall reading is Jesus and his disciples. I'm sure it's there. Then that's why I'm asking you. But
yeah, yeah. So, for example, so he calls the 12 apostles, right? And I'm not a New Testament scholar, but I know that they had responsibilities. For example, Judas was in charge of he's like the budget guy, right? And that's why he got so upset whenever someone would spend money on Jesus, like the woman who comes to him and anoints his feet. Judas is offended because he's like, "Oh, we could have taken that and sold it," and you know, so he's worried about money, right? Because he's the sort of treasurer. Um, so yeah, you had the 12 apostles who had their main job was to spread the message, gather everyone into the kingdom, and start it from there. So, but it's not like nowadays, you know, where Jesus was trying to start a religious organization. Religion didn't exist back then. It's just a way of life.
right.
Um, religion is a concept that's been invented in the last 500 years or so.
Cool. Beyond the apostles, were there other chosen people?
Yeah,
Okay. Nice.
yeah. There's the 70. He called 70 people to do that, and then there's, again, I'm not a New Testament scholar, but I know that there were women that he called to be prophetesses, or at least were considered to be prophetesses at that time. Whether he called them or not, they were within the Christian tradition, and so they served a role within that.
Okay. Well,
So yeah.
that suffices my. I feel like that's something I should have known, but since I didn't, no such thing as a stupid question here. So, all right. Sorry for the
No,
tangent. Back to Martin Harris.
hard to have a stupid question when you have a stupid podcast. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah,
Ouch.
okay. So we have Oliver Cowdery. Um, Again, big deal that he came back into the church. Big deal that he shared his testimony. Then we have Martin Harris. He was excommunicated in 1837 and rebaptized in 1870. So he's a pretty old guy by then. He died 5 years later. He did eventually decide to come to Utah. He sort of patched things up with Brigham Young when he came back, and then retired to Cache Valley. But his experience is a little bit different and a little bit more controversial, or it was at the time, because on numerous occasions, Harris told people that the experience for him was more of a spiritual experience than a physical experience, and that he saw the angel with his spiritual eyes. And this became somewhat problematic for a few members. Now, which is odd because we've talked about this before. The people living at this time in the early days of the church were still swept up in a lot of the vernacular and the traditions of the Old Testament. If you remember in the Old Testament, there's lots of examples of people who behold the divine with their physical eyes and are, snuffed out. So, just like they touch the Ark of the Covenant and they die, or they look inside the Ark of the Covenant and they die, or they see the face of God and they die. And so, people in Joseph Smith's era are they still hold to that tradition, which is you have to have some kind of change happen for you to experience the divine in that way. And so, for Martin Harris to kind of say, "Oh, I beheld the angel with my spiritual eyes," that wouldn't have been out of the ordinary, but it was for some people. And an example that we have is a letter from Stephen Burnett to Lyman Johnson in 1838. And Stephen Burnett, I believe at this point had left the church. In fact, he left the church at this point. He'd become disillusioned with Joseph. And a big reason why, he said, was because of Martin Harris's testimony. And in this letter, he writes, "I've reflected long and deliberately upon the history of this church, weighed the evidence for and against it. But when I came to hear Martin Harris state in public that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in a vision or imagination, neither Oliver nor David, and also that the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it, the last pedestal gave way." So this is him saying that he heard Martin Harris publicly contradict the testimony of the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses. Um, let's see, and then
So could I ask a question then?
Sure.
When Martin Harris, was it after he was excommunicated when he started saying, "I didn't see it with my physical eyes, I saw it with my spiritual eyes"? Was that all after he had left the church, or would he have said that prior to leaving the church as well?
He said it prior to. There's lots of examples of him even as early as 1830, when the Book of Mormon is being published, where he's in the press office of E.B. Grandin, and people are asking him, "So, did you see it with your physical eyes? Was it spiritual? Tell us about it." And he kind of hinted that no, it was I saw them spiritually. Now, a lot of those accounts come from anti-Mormons, so take that for what you will. But it is repeated over time that he kind of insinuates that it was a spiritual experience for him. And in fact, in response to Stephen Burnett, he again publicly comes up and says he gets up in front of a crowd or a congregation and said that he was sorry for any man who rejected the Book of Mormon, for he knew it was true. And this is Harris responding to Burnett. He said that he had hefted the plates repeatedly in a box with only a tablecloth or a handkerchief over them, but he never saw them, only as he saw a city through a mountain. Um, so that's kind of the way he described seeing the plates. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but um,
I'm not sure what seeing a city through a mountain means, but I think it's the intent's clear that he, again, he never saw them physically. I'm adding that based on the context of what you said. The anti Mormons at the time were spreading
yeah, yeah,
repeatedly and rapidly. So he doesn't contradict them. He's not. No, I did see them with my physical eyes. He said, I never saw them only as he saw a city through a mountain. Meaning, I would interpret that in context as I understand it to be spiritualized again. But
yeah, yeah. And and later on in this same passage, he goes on to say, "I shouldn't have said what I said about the other witnesses and the 8 witnesses. That was wrong of me to say that." But I, when you read through, and we'll read a couple more examples of what he said, but I think Martin Harris kind of had a hard time sort of expressing what the experience was like, you know. So, for example, in 1853, he said,
remind
"Did
me,
I not at one?"
sorry,
Oh,
was
go
Martin
ahead.
Harris the one who left and saw them after the other two, or was
Yes. Hmm.
okay? So Martin Harris was the one who couldn't see him at first. He left. The other two had their experience, and then later he did. Okay, sorry,
Exactly.
1853.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
that's all right. And then he said, "Did I not at one time hold the plates on my knee an hour and a half whilst in conversation with Joseph when we went to bury them in the woods, that the enemy might not obtain them? Yes, I did. And as many of the plates as Joseph translated, I handled with my hands, plate after plate." Um, so that's interesting. I think here, this is an interesting account because he says, we went to bury them in the woods while I held them on my knee, To me, it implies that he held the plates. Maybe they were covered at the time. To me, it implies that he's talking about two different experiences here. The first, where he mentions holding them on his knee, it sounds to me like that was uh, an event where he had the plates before the witnessing experience, right? Because he talks about burying them to hide them from the enemy. I could be wrong, but that's sort of the general interpretation. And then he mentions handling other plates. David Whitmer would also say that there were other plates that the angel showed them in the witnessing experience. So that's kind of an interesting account. But here he's saying, I held them physically. I held them. I held the other plates too with my physical hands. And then there's several others, but this is another one that I thought was interesting. This is from an 1874 interview, so right before Harris died, but it was recounted in 1930. So there could be some issues with recollection here, but it's still valuable, I think, because it adds to the narrative. Uh, this is from a man who was living with Harris in Cache Valley in 1874. Um, he asked him about his experience seeing the plates. And he said that when he asked him about him, it was like a change came over Martin Harris. And he said, just as sure as you see the sun shining, just as sure am I that I stood in the presence of an angel of God with Joseph Smith and saw him hold the gold plates in his hands. I also saw the Urim and Thummim, the breastplate, the sword of Laban. I saw the angel descend from heaven. And when he had finished his message, I saw him ascend up into heaven. Then the heavens were opened, and I heard the voice of God declare that everything the angel had told us was true, that the Book of Mormon was translated correctly. And I was commanded by God's voice to testify to the whole world what I had seen and heard. Then he relates the Joseph recollection. I cried out in my ecstasy, 'tis enough, mine eyes have beheld. Um, so yeah, kind of interesting his, because he kind of goes back and forth a little bit, saying, "Oh, I had a physical experience. No, it was a spiritual experience." Um, so uh, but to members of the church, as I showed, like with Stephen Burnett, it was important to know how the experience went down. So that's the value, I think, of the Harris accounts.
Was he the only one who used who's who said that it was that we was he the only one who said that it was not a physical experience, or are there of the 11 are there others as well that said it wasn't? I didn't actually see them, I just spiritually saw them.
Yeah, great question. So David Whitmer said someone asked him in 1887 if he saw the place with his spiritual eyes, and he says, "Of course, we were in the spirit when we had the view, for no man can behold the face of an angel except in a spiritual view, but we were in the body also, and everything was as natural to us as it is at any time." So anyway, there you have that for
So that kind of,
from David Whitmer.
you said that's in 1878 when he said that.
1887. Yeah. Hmm.
1887. So
So
at this point
yeah,
he knew both sides and of the by both sides. He knows that people were questioning Harris's spiritual eye thing, and he was in a position to clarify or kind of reconcile what Harris was saying.
yeah, that's definitely possible. It must have been on the minds of everyone, right? Because he was straight up asked, like, "Did you see them with your spiritual eyes?" So the person that asked him may have heard about how Martin Harris talked about the experience and wanted to know if David Whitmer's was similar. But yeah, if you ask me, it sounds like David Whitmer was able to sort of express his experience better than Martin Harris was. But that's just me. Um, let's see. I'll talk about David Whitmer just really quick, and then we'll end the episode if that works for you.
Sure.
So there's kind of a fun account of David Whitmer talking about it in 1878. So he's of the three witnesses, David Whitmer was the only one who did not come back to the church. He stayed in Missouri. And Orson Pratt, who was an apostle, and Joseph F. Smith went to visit him in Missouri in 1878 just to talk to him and interview him about his experience, about the early days of the church. And it's kind of fun when you read the whole thing because David Whitmer obviously knew Orson Pratt in the early days of the church. And it's kind of fun to read about how they interacted with each other. And like David Whitmer says, "Oh, you're a lot fatter than the last time I saw you, and your beard is amazing," that sort of thing. Um,
What
so anyway,
would
so they ask
or
him.
what would Orson Pratt's and Joseph Smith's positions be at this time?
Yeah, so they were both apostles.
Apostles at this time. Okay.
Brigham
So the
Young,
apostles went.
yeah, Brigham Young, right? Yeah, so Brigham Young had been
Okay.
dead for about a year, and John Taylor had not reorganized the first presidency yet. So the 12 are in charge. So Orson Pratt and Joseph F. Smith are in the governing body of the church. So they go and they talk to him and they ask him, uh, about the experience. He says Martin Harris was not with us at this time. He obtained a view of them afterwards. Joseph, Oliver, and myself were together when I saw them. We not only saw the plates of the Book of Mormon, but also the brass plates, which were the plates in the Book of Mormon narrative. They're the plates that Nephi takes from Laban. The plates of the Book of Ether, which again is another section of the Book of Mormon. The plates containing the records of the wickedness and secret abominations of the people of the world down to the time of their being engraved, and many other plates. The fact is, it was just as though Joseph, Oliver, and I were sitting just here on a log when we were overshadowed by a light. It was not like the light of the sun, nor that of a fire, but more glorious and beautiful, extended around us. I cannot tell how far, but in the midst of this light, about as far as off as he sits, and he's pointing to his brother, or at least a family member, John C. Whitmer, sitting a few feet from him. There appeared, as it were, a table with many records or plates upon it, besides the plates of the Book of Mormon, also the sword of Laban, the directors or the Liahona, and the interpreters. I saw them just as plain as I see this bed. The record says he hit a bed that was next to him. I heard the voice of the Lord declaring that the records of the plates of the Book of Mormon were translated by the gift and power of God. And then they asked him, "Did you see the angel?" He said, "Yes, he stood before us. Our testimony, as recorded in the Book of Mormon, is strictly and absolutely true, just as it is there written." So,
Very
yeah, there you
direct,
have it.
very
That's kind of a fun
powerful.
one, just because. Yep. Mm-hmm.
One thing,
Yeah. And then
so
there's a bunch. From what I could tell, I think David Whitmer was the one who talked about it the most.
yeah. So he mentioned that he saw the brass plates, Book of Ether. The Book of Ether, as we read it in the Book of Mormon, is the abridgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or not? So is he
Yes.
talking about the actual book that Mormon would have abridged that we read in the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, that's kind of how I take it.
I would too, because it
But
wouldn't make sense that he would call out a book that's in the middle of the other book. I would think,
yeah,
anyway.
uh, yeah. But again, he says he saw the plates of brass, so it's possible that Moroni brought those as well. Theoretically.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't want to go too down that, but I just thought that was
yeah.
interesting. But
Yeah.
regardless, very direct, very clear, very
Mhm.
powerful statements, bold statements there.
Yeah. So anyway, just a final comment. Again, as I said earlier, people really attached their belief. They still do in the LDS Church. Um, I think if something were to come out that said David Whitmer, for example, made it all up, and it was sort of confirmed to be written by him, it would have a very interesting effect, let's say, on how people viewed the Book of Mormon. Um, and it's powerful because people can sort of, or members of the LDS Church can kind of hang their hats on this, right? It's like, well, there were 11 people, 12 if you count Mary Whitmer, who said they saw the plates and they swore by it and they never denied it, even though they all left the church. And so that's why I thought it was worth talking about today.
Yeah, no, I thought this is great. Good idea. It is. I don't know. It gets you thinking if they are as convicted, as convinced as um, the the Book of Mormon is true, and that the church is the one and only restoration. What could lead them towards apostasy and excommunication? But I think that's left.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll forever just be left to people's thoughts and people's speculations of what went down there. But I know we will dig into the details,
Well, we'll talk
specifics of
about it in a
them.
later episode.
But I think that the underlying thought of it is still I don't know unless you have the answer as to how that could happen more so than just what happened. That'll be interesting. I'll be thinking about it until we have that episode at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yep.
thanks,
Me
John.
too. Yeah, we'll get to it. Thank you.
Well, appreciate
This was
it.
fun
Well
as
done
usual.
as always. If here, I'm gonna put the plug in this time because I remembered. Subscribe. Tell your friends. As far as I can tell, all of our listeners have subscribed on YouTube. And I just say that because I have no idea unless you subscribe if you're listening or not. So I can see downloads and things. So we definitely have more downloads than subscribers. But who knows if they listen. So please, if you're listening, subscribe. If you have questions, reach out to us. We're happy with questions. Follow us on Instagram. And Yeah. Tell a friend. That's really my biggest goal is just to let people know we're out there, and people who want to listen,
Yeah.
give them the opportunity to listen. Because until you talk to your friends and say, "Hey, I found this pretty interesting," they're not gonna even know we're out
Mm.
here. So was that good?
Yeah, and definitely watch this on YouTube. Um, and what hat Tyler's wearing from week to week.
I didn't know my hat was a thing.
Oh, it is now. It's a thing for me.
Typically, people on
Gets me
podcasts
anxious.
get you anxious. This hat gets you anxious?
Yeah, I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to see what hat he's
Oh,
wearing today.
okay, good. I thought this specific hat gave you some sort of
Oh,
anxiety or fear in some sense, and I thought let's have a talk, John. All right, get you
no,
excitedly anxious,
he's
not
chomping
fearful,
at the
not
bit,
fearful
but
anxious.
yeah,
Okay, cool. Well, we'll
no,
see
no,
what
like
hat I
I guess, yeah, I just want to see it.
we'll see what hat I wear next week. That's a good idea. It's probably gonna blow
Yep.
John's mind.
All right. Yes, I can't wait.